After losing a second straight European final over the weekend, everybody in England wants to ask the same question. Should Gareth Southgate continue to be the manager of this team, and is he the guy to lead them to the 2026 World Cup? But before we get down that path, we've got to look back at the tournament that just took place and ask ourselves how much of the blame for England's failures fall at the hands of Gareth Southgate. And are they even failures? England made the finals. We're going to talk about that and more here on Pints and Punditry at the Pitchside Pub. So the answer to the question is going to be some. Some of the failures fall on Gareth Southgate, some fall on the players, and some shouldn't even be considered failures. But it's so much more complex than that, and analyzing international managers is exceptionally difficult because of such a small sample size. You simply don't get a lot of games to see how the manager and the players interact. But we've had a large sample size of Gareth Southgate, and we know a lot about him, and this was just the last data set of a long history of Southgate and the English team. So we're going to talk about a lot of what we saw over the past month with the English team, and if he's the guy to move forward, and just how much of England losing this tournament really falls at his feet. But before we do that, go ahead and hit that subscribe button for me down below so you can follow the channel. Go ahead and get in that comment section. I would love to get your thoughts, particularly English fans who are a lot closer to this than I am. Get down in that comment section. Let me know what you think. You can leave a lot of comments on Twitter at PitchsidePub, and check out the website, pitchsidepub.com. So, as with some of these videos that I do, I don't always have the answers, and I don't know that I have the answers here. I'm just going to put out some discussion points and state some facts, or at least what I think are facts in some cases. Evaluating international managers is extremely hard, and I know that from our side of the pond because we just fired our manager here in the States, and it was long overdue, and there are some similarities between Greg Berhalter and Gareth Southgate, which is not a good thing for either person. But I would say Southgate is a much better manager than Berhalter overall, and his track record on the pitch really does illuminate that. And it's really important to start with a couple of key factors here. Gareth Southgate, on paper, will go down as one of the most successful English managers of all time for the English national team. That's just a fact. Certainly in the last 50 years, nobody's won a trophy, so you can't just use that as the standard and say, well, if you didn't win a trophy, you weren't a good manager. Well, then you haven't had one in half a century, so that's not a fair barometer. So we need to put this within the scope of how we define success, which is why when I say, who do we blame the failures on for this tournament, we have to ask ourselves, is it really a failure? Making the finals of the Euros is a big deal. That's good, right? I think. I'm not sure, because there's a chance that a lot of managers could have made the finals with this team. So those are the questions we're gonna kind of ask today. The other thing we need to get out there is Gareth Southgate, from every single thing you hear, is a good guy. He is well liked. He's liked by the players. He's liked by the FA. He's liked by the staff. He probably would be liked by most of the fans if they ever met him. The vitriol we see directed his way is simply because of the results on the field. But for all intents and purposes, Gareth Southgate is a really good guy, and the players like playing for him. I will say very clearly, the players liking a manager is so irrelevant, I want to scream from the rooftops. It's an argument I hear all the time. It's an argument I hear here in the States. It's part of why we rehired Greg Berhalter, because the players liked him, and I could not possibly care any less about if the players like their manager, particularly at the international stage where they can't go anywhere. It's one thing at the club level. If you have a guy who pisses everybody off, Thomas Tuchel, and the players don't like playing for him, yeah, that can run its course and players have an out. They can go somewhere. But Harry Kane's not leaving the English national team. Jude Bellingham's not leaving the English national team. Phil Foden's not leaving the English national team. They can't. So you can bring in the biggest jerk in the world, and there ain't nothing they can do about it. Now, players still have to be motivated to play, so he can't purposely come in and just be a jerk and piss everybody off. But if he's abrasive, and he tells these guys things they don't want to hear, and they don't particularly love playing for him and don't love that style, and they're used to coming on their international breaks and having it be a laid-back, very professional sort of mentality and mood in the dressing room, tough. So I think Gareth Southgate being a good guy makes me hate all the negativity that goes his way. But it is not, in fact, a credential for being a manager, and I want to get that out right away. Now, we have to look at the results. They made a final. That's good. But this was a really good team. They were the odds-on favorites by most sports books going into the tournament. So you have to ask yourself, couldn't other managers have gotten them to this point? And anytime you're talking about replacing a manager, that has to be the first question. It's not asked enough. Okay, if you want Gareth Southgate out, who do you want in his place? Right? Who are we replacing him with? Who are the real options? And don't say Pep Guardiola. He's not going to go do that, right? Jurgen Klopp, in the United States, everybody says, let's fire Greg Berhalter and go get Jurgen Klopp. He doesn't want to manage. He wants a break, and he doesn't want the American team. I'll tell you that much. Maybe he'd have interest in the English one, but that's not a realistic option. So we got to be realistic. If Gareth Southgate goes, who are the realistic options, and does that put you in a better place? I don't know that I know the answer to that. We haven't looked at who the odds-on favorites are at the moment, but if you're replacing him with, let's say, Frank Lampard, how's his track record? Is that really going to be better? He was a great player, but his coaching track record is abysmal, right? Wayne Rooney, he's available. I'm just thinking of former English national team players, which seems to be a prerequisite, who have coaching experience but aren't coaching at the moment, right? And so, actually, I think Wayne Rooney got a job. But nevertheless, he won't be coaching for long because he's a terrible manager. So, you don't have a lot of good options, right? So, before you run Berhalter out of there, you got to look at the options. But also, before we give him credit for getting to back-to-back finals, we have to say, how many other managers could have gotten to back-to-back finals? And the answer is probably a lot. A lot of decent managers could have gotten this team to semifinals and finals for sure, because this team is so talented. So, I guess the question is, does Southgate get credit for making back-to-back finals? Or is that sort of the bare minimum that was expected, and he gets blamed for not winning one of them? That's a tough call. Because, let's face it, this Spanish team was good. This is a good team. Roger doesn't lose, right? This is a good team. So losing to them is not really some embarrassing thing. It wasn't like they got knocked out in the quarters to a team that that couldn't really stack up with them. No, this was a good team they lost to. There's also the randomness of the game of football. And if England and Spain play 10 times, Spain doesn't win all 10. I don't know if it's 50-50 or 60-40 or 70-30, but neither team wins all 10 of those games, right? So sometimes it just comes down to the execution at hand, and sometimes your players execute and yours don't, or the bounce of a ball, or hitting a post, or one foul called, or any number of things that can go wrong or right in your direction over the course of one game. And so that's where if you really are trying to evaluate a coach or a player, and you're basing it on the outcome of one game, right? Making a final versus winning it, that is a really slippery slope to go down. That is not a good evaluative standard for a player or a coach. I tweeted this out before the game, and if you don't follow us on Twitter, follow us at Pitchside Pub. I put it on Instagram as well. I said, right as the game was starting, I said, Gareth Southgate will be the same manager after this game as he is right now. If you want him out right now before this game, you should still want him out even if they win. And if you want him to stay, you should still want him to stay even if they lose. The outcome of that game did not change who Gareth Southgate, the manager, was. And I'm not saying he should be out or he shouldn't. I'm saying it's not any different than it was yesterday. It's not any different than it was the day before. It's not any different than it was a month before. They made the final of this tournament. That is an admirable achievement. It's also probably one a lot of managers could have done. So factor that in where you will. There's also the way in which they got there. Now, for as much credit as we want to give Southgate for achieving this, you can easily take it away by saying, yeah, but who'd they have to play to get there? They had one of the easiest groups. They were on the easy side of the bracket. They dodged France. They dodged a lot of the really good teams in this tournament. In fact, they really didn't face a team that was equal to them until the finals. You can make an argument for Netherlands, but it's not nearly as talented of a team. The Netherlands was their first real tough opponent. Spain was their first equal opponent. Until that point, they played a bunch of teams they really should have beaten. And I guess that's the biggest knock, is that it feels like they lucked their way into the finals of this tournament. Whereas in 2021, I guess it was, they felt like they went out and earned their way more. This felt like they sort of backdoored their way in, especially with all the late goals and playing from behind, and the fact that for the first 60 to 70 minutes of every game, it looked like they weren't even really trying to score. The goal was just to maintain possession and sort of dictate the tempo. And then they would get down, and then they'd turn it on, and then they got bailed out by late goals by Ollie Watkins, and even in the final, Cole Palmer tying it up, and Harry Kane at the last minute. There was just so much late drama that felt like it was bailing them out. On the other hand, right, we're going back and forth because every time you make a anti-Southgate argument, you can make a pro-Southgate argument, right? Who decided to sub Ollie Watkins on? Gareth Southgate, right? Who decided to put Cole Palmer on? Gareth Southgate. Who decided to put Ivan Toney on in the game where he came in late and had an effect? Gareth Southgate did, right? He's the one pulling all these strings. So does he not get any credit for making those substitutions? He has to get some credit for that. At the same time, right? We can put this right back. You can make an argument that he should have made them 10, 20, 30 minutes earlier. You can make an argument that Cole Palmer should have gotten some starts in this tournament. That the fact that he came on 70 minutes into the final, immediately scored, is not as much a credit to Southgate as it is an obvious glaring mistake that he missed, that Cole Palmer should have been playing this whole tournament. And I actually do think he should have been playing because he has such an attacking mindset that he's the only guy out there that probably just sort of looked at Southgate and said, screw your possession, I'm ripping shots, right? And he got to play like that because he kept coming in when they were down. And that was, you talk about detriments to Southgate, that's one of the issues I saw was the playing style, which when they got down, obviously became much more direct and attacking and worked. And it worked, particularly against the inferior opponents. I don't know why they played this ho-hum possession-based style for the entire tournament against these inferior opponents when they really could have just shoved it right down their throats. And you saw them kick that into high gear every time they were down and they put on some more attacking options, and lo and behold, they scored goals. Well, they scored goals because they were taking shots. They were taking shots in places where they had been passing it backwards. And so you want to give him credit for making those moves, and he does deserve credit, right? He made the moves. Nobody else made the moves. He's the one that pulled off the captain on multiple occasions. That's a big-time move. Harry Kane is one of the most decorated players in English history, and you're pulling him off for some guys who are not as decorated. And it worked. So you have to give him credit, but then he puts Harry Kane right back on the next game, and so you have to sort of temper how much credit you give him. And that's why this is so hard to do. You want to give him credit for the adjustments, but also some of the adjustments were fairly obvious, and wouldn't any other manager have done the same, and would some managers have done it earlier? In fact, you saw a lot of fans clamoring for these things because they just weren't that complicated. We also saw the formation change, and that was a really interesting dynamic in this tournament because remember, they started with 4 in the back, playing the 4-2-3-1, and Trent Alexander-Arnold as the second, in the double pivot, the second central midfielder, defensive midfielder. And boy, that feels like ages ago because Trent barely got on the pitch after that experiment ended, which, again, credit for realizing it's not working and making the adjustment, but massive failure for not using Trent Alexander-Arnold more after that, particularly when you switch to a formation in which he could be so good. I saw somebody on Twitter say Trent Alexander-Arnold, at one point they were playing 3 fullbacks, and yet their best fullback, Trent Alexander-Arnold, wasn't on the pitch. And that was just like, because it's true, it's exactly what was happening at one point. The fact that he didn't, when the team went to 3 at the back, and I really like the 3 at the back with this particular collection of players, the 3 at the back, that right wing back position that Bukayo Saka ended up doing a pretty good job in, just screams for Trent Alexander-Arnold, and you could have thrown Saka over to the left and gotten Kieran Trippier out of there, particularly until Luke Shaw was healthy enough to come back. That seemed like the most obvious solution there, and yet it was like, nope, Trent, we've moved you to midfield now, and if you can't do it, you're not going to play. And that was bizarre, particularly when you look at the other option, even when they had 4 at the back, was Kyle Walker, who then you switch to 3 at the back, and you're taking a right back. You're taking a fullback known for his speed, but also for his mental gaffes on defense at times, and you're shifting him in as a third center back. It doesn't make any sense. They had enough center backs to play them all. Kyle Walker should have only been on this roster as basically Kylian Mbappe insurance, right? You have Walker on the roster, and you put him on the bench, and if the other team has a really pacey left winger You put Kyle Walker on in the 70th minute to run with him because nobody can run like Kyle Walker, even in his 30s, right? He's still the fastest guy out there. He's the only guy that can stay with Kylian Mbappe. It's what City does when they play Real Madrid against Vinny Jr. and now Mbappe. It's what he's good at, but he shouldn't be out there playing over Trent Alexander-Arnold for 90 minutes a game, particularly when you go to 3 at the back and you can have that third defender behind Trent to make up for some of the defensive liabilities. So again, credit for making the formational change and changing up the system, and I like that system better, so credit where it's due, but discredit for the way he went about it, the players he used in it, and the fact that this wasn't new. They had done 3 at the back before. I'm not sure why we even toyed with the Trent in midfield situation, that experiment. So you want to give him credit, but again, the credit is for fixing mistakes that he made in the first place. So it's so hard to decide where the credit goes and where it doesn't, and how much of the credit we're giving him is for making up for mistakes he made in the first place, making up for unforced errors. So it's really tough. It is a results-driven business, but I think if you want to look at results, Gareth Southgate, that's actually really a feather in his cap. He has had as good of results as any manager in the last 50 years of English football. So I don't think that's the argument you want to make. You can make an argument that he's just been there too long and the players are maybe a little comfortable, maybe a little too comfortable, maybe a little lackadaisical with him. He's more of a laid-back guy. They like him. But he has been instrumental in the development of that FA system from top to bottom. And I'm always screaming about longevity. And the fact that he's been the manager for so long has had that trickle-down effect to the lower levels. And the English developmental system right now is fantastic. And that's one of the best in the world. And that he does deserve credit for that. So I think if Southgate moves on, the FA will thank him. He'll be an FA legend. They'll thank him for his services. It wouldn't shock me if he's back as the manager at some point, because I don't know that you're going to be thrilled with who you replace him with. But I don't think you replace Gareth Southgate based on this tournament. I think you can evaluate. If you're the FA, you can evaluate with him and say, we need to see a few changes. We need to talk about some of these things. Let's get your thought process and understand what you were thinking there, because some of the changes were just so obvious and they were made late or they weren't made at all. He does have a loyalty problem. He is so overly loyal to these guys that have been around so long, Harry Kane and Kyle Walker, and even a guy like Declan Rice, who did not have a good tournament and probably should have been taken out at some point, especially since they did not need a double pivot against most of the more inferior teams that they played. And frankly, Kobe Mainoo ran circles around him and was just a better player during this tournament. So there's a loyalty there that simply can get him in trouble sometimes. You also have to look at the system. I've said this before in other videos. The most important thing for an international manager is to put your superstars, your best players, in a position to play their best ball and then build everything else around them, right? That means getting Cole Palmer out there on the right wing. Maybe that means Saka's on the left, right? I don't know. Foden, central, not drifting out wide where he's not nearly as good. Bellingham, deeper, where he can carry the ball forward, not as a creator playing hero ball in the box. That's not where his strength is. Harry Kane, stop dropping down so far. Harry Kane's a wonderful player, but if that system doesn't work, then maybe you go to one of the other guys. So the loyalty is a problem. The adherence to a system that doesn't necessarily fit his players' styles the best is a problem. But they're solvable problems. They're very solvable problems. And so I think we need to be careful. English fans, you need to be careful with what you wish for, with trying to run Southgate out of there, because I'm not sure who your replacement's going to be. But get down in that comment section. Let me know who you would like as a replacement, and if you want Southgate out or if you want to give him more chances. I'm torn. I understand both sides of the argument, but go ahead and make the argument down below, because I get it. I get it from the American standpoint. We just went through this. I'd love to hear the English version of your thoughts. While you're down there, you can leave some comments on Twitter at PitchsidePub. Make sure you hit that subscribe button for me down below so you can follow the channel and check out the website, pitchsidepub.com. Thanks as always for joining us here on Pints and Punditry at the Pitchside Pub.